meeting of the Poverty and Homelessness Squad, Thursday, March 19th, 2026, to order. And my first order of the agenda is to apologize for the fact that I'm working the gavel. As soon as Chair Murphy gets here, I will hand the gavel over into her capable right or left hand, whichever one she chooses to use. So for a while, you'll get me. Shall we have introductions?
Recording in progress.
Then let's start with introductions around the room. I will begin to my right with Carly.
Hi, Carly Walker. I'm the Homeless Management Information Systems Advisor.
Amanda Borda, I'm a Senior Program Services Coordinator and Continuum of Care.
Hi, I'm James Yu. I'm the Homelessness and Community Action Manager with Lane County.
Hi, I'm Kate Budd, she, her. I'm the Human Services Division Manager.
And I am Pat Farr. I'm a member of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. I serve as one of the 2 vice chairs, and today I'm handling the gavel.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm Pat Farr's intern, and I'm a student at the University of Oregon.
Hi, I'm Jen Brown. I'm also an intern through Portland State University on the Homeless and Community Action Division.
I'm entering the room, my friend from Bethel.
Hi, I'm Melvin Niles, MSW intern, Housing and Community Action.
And a aficionado of Albertsons. I know this because I went.
That's right.
Welcome. Then I'll ask online, how shall we do this?
Well,
I'm Maggie Bagan from Florence on the Poverty and Homelessness Board, and with the Cold Weather Shelter and other nonprofits in Florence.
Very good. And I'll just go down the list from top to bottom and call a name. And if you would introduce yourself, someone from Anne's Heart. Now, what's the best, James? I'm going to let you handle it.
I think it's the executive committee members that we introduce.
Very good. And Maggie is?
Yep, Maggie, and then
I see Mayor Knudsen.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Mayor Karen Knudsen from the city of Eugene. Nice to see you.
Gordon just hopped on.
And Mayor Van Gordon.
Good afternoon. Sean Van Gordon, Mayor of Springfield.
James is helping me identify members of the committee.
Trying. I think that's it for executive committee members. There's other PHB members if you want to introduce them.
Very good. Let's take a moment to introduce anyone. Members of the PHB who are not members of the executive committee, please feel free to introduce right now. James, can you handle that for me?
Yep. Jack, you want to go first?
Hey, this is Jack Boyson, non-voting member, but happy to be here.
And Wakan?
Yeah, Wakan Alferez with Homes for Good, non-voting member.
Sherry?
Sherry Walton, voting member.
I think that is it for members.
Excellent. And welcome everyone else who is here. I'll ask you to listen to the conversation. Poverty and Homelessness Board executive committee members will answer hands first when on the queue. And we will also entertain questions from Poverty and Homelessness Board voting and associate members. But typically in these meetings, we don't look for questions from the visitors who are observing the meeting. So we'll move on down the list, down the agenda. James, is that all we need for the preamble?
Yep.
You know, when I was first the vice chair of this committee back in 15, I think it was easy to introduce yourselves because everybody was there. We would all meet in the same room. And while we are all, everybody knows this, it's wonderful being able to be remote, because if you have someplace else to be, or if you don't want to leave one meeting early to get to another one late, it gives you that capacity. But if you can be here in person, it really does make for a more stimulating, easier conversation, understanding that not everybody's always going to be here in person. So moving down the agenda, do we have any public comment? Anyone signed up in the room or online for public comment?
No one signed up in the room. Is there anyone online hoping to give public comment?
You can raise your hand now if you have not yet. Very good. Then I'll move down the agenda to our consent. And we do have a quorum. We have before us a consent calendar, which predominantly is the minutes from November 20th. And I will look for a meeting for passage of the consent calendar.
Could it really be January? Sorry, I just look at the
it says November.
It does say November. All right, excuse me.
So I am the only voting member who's in the room. And since I have the gavel, I can't really make the motion. So please, somebody help me out with the motion.
I'm a voting member. I guess I can make the motion to approve the consent agenda, I think.
Second
I'll take your motion.
and seconded.
And since the actual real chair is here now, I could second it, but Mayor Knutson, you just popped on. Do I have a second?
Second, yes.
Moved by Maggie Bagan, seconded by Mayor Knutson. We have the consent calendar, and I will tell everyone that the chair has just stepped in the room. This is the last word you'll hear from me until a month from tomorrow. So with that, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously with all present, and I would have, and the gavel to the chair, and we've had introductions, we've gone through the consent calendar, so we're at the CFC NOFO update.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Go ahead, Amanda.
So my update will be pretty brief today because we're still sort of in between things right now and there hasn't been much development. So where we left off at the last Poverty and Homelessness Board all-member meeting, I think just the day prior, HUD had filed an emergency motion in the District Court of Rhode Island for the lawsuit related to the NOFO. Essentially asking them to lift the injunction that is in place based on the appropriations language. They felt like that gave them a window to put their fiscal year 25 NOFO out once again for the Q3 and Q4 continuum of care grants. So since that time, that motion has been denied for the emergency lifting of the injunction, at least. They have since filed appeal in the Court of Appeals. So that's sort of where things are lying right now. And there has not been any other update that I've seen from the court information, at least, and haven't heard any other updates at this point. So the injunction is still in place. They cannot issue another NOFO. Based on the appropriations language, they were to immediately renew Q1 grants. We have yet to see, and other COCs have not yet received any grant agreements for the Q1. So we're now well past, I think, a month past that decision. And so we have not heard anything, and the HUD field offices don't seem to know any other information as well. I think beyond that, we're just hoping to hear soon about those Q1 and then potentially soon Q2 renewals. And then start planning for fiscal year 26 notice of funding, which we expect before June 1st. And I just saw today that they're planning to release the COC registration, which is sort of the first step in that process. So kind of in a waiting holding pattern right now until we hear more about the court process and perhaps the appeals decision, which I think they did request a decision, expedited decision, just because they in order to implement that NOFO, they would have to know before the end of March in order to have time to do that. And so we might hear something in the next couple of weeks. Go ahead, Commissioner Park.
So Amanda, you don't know, and HUD doesn't know, and the field officers don't know. Does anybody on earth think this is good?
I'm not sure what advocacy has been done sort of with the legislators to let them know sort of that like what they had asked in the appropriations has not been done. I'm sure there is some advocacy happening to that effect, but I have not heard anything else about sort of holding HUD's feet to the fire on that. I'm sure they're just awaiting that appeals decision before they do anything.
Well, it leaves me without further questions. Thank you.
Any questions for anyone else before we move on? All right. Thanks for keeping us updated, Amanda. And we're going to move over to Kate with the HSC funding overview.
Sure, and I thought it would be helpful to provide just an overview, not only of the Human Services Commission funding that flows from Lane County, and as I hope many of you are aware, the Human Services Commission pot of dollars is not only Lane County funding, but also City of Eugene and City of Springfield funding pulled together into one pot of resources. But I also will provide an update as to what we understand right now related to state and federal funding. So very big picture. You have Lane County, which has nearly 2,000 staff members with a budget of over $1 billion. for this current fiscal year, which goes through the end of June. It includes 11 departments, some of which are led by elected officials such as assessment and taxation, others by staff members who are hired just like myself, such as Health and Human Services. Among those 11 departments, Health and Human Services is one of them, which is led by Eve Gray. And then within the Health and Human Services Department, there are 6 divisions. And the Human Services Division, the division that I lead, is one of those 6. And so whether we're talking about Human Services Commission funds, or we're talking about Continuum of Care, or HMIS, or even Veteran Services, that is all under the Human Services umbrella. Next slide. Keep doing this. So every year, Lane County has an annual budget process. And they work through the budget development timeline. And so at the beginning of the year, leadership starts working with the division managers, myself included, to pull together the best budget with available knowledge possible for the next fiscal year. Starting with mid-March. My voice always sounds different, but I hate it. There we go. So then.
I just
We've all been there.
Yes, it's all right.
My face is as red.
So the departments submit their budget requests, which roll up the division budget requests in late February. And then in mid-March, the departments meet with Steve Moker-Heisky, our county administrator, to talk through the proposed budgets. And then in late April, Steve Moker-Heisky proposes a budget to the Budget Committee of Lane County. And that consists of our Board of County Commissioners, and each commissioner has an opportunity to appoint one community member to also be a part of the committee. And so that Budget Committee dives in deeply throughout their month of work, or maybe more, to determine, what will be the final budget move forward to the Board of County Commissioners in mid-June, where they vote to adopt the budget. And so we're right in the thick of things right now, and continue to learn more as to what it is that our division needs to do to move forward with a balanced budget. That could be that we don't have to realize any additional cuts that have not already been made. It could also be that we need to realize more cuts and make adjustments accordingly. So the Human Services Commission funds that flow through Lane County come from our general fund. And the Lane County General Fund is the most flexible dollars that Lane County has, and has the discretion to use those dollars as they see fit. Our budget in Lane County is comprised of 33 separate funds, the general fund being one of them, and it is funded through a number of different resources, such as our property tax revenue, car rental tax, cable franchise fees, and different taxes like cigarette, liquor, and marijuana taxes as well. And then we also are able sometimes to bring in grants or contracts that may go to the general fund, or sometimes they're much more specific and cannot be a part of the general fund. So when we look closely at the Lane County General Fund and where the dollars go, the vast majority, or 74%, goes to public safety, which encompasses a wide array of support, such as the sheriff's office, the jail, parole and probation, and other important public safety resources within the community. 8% goes to public health and welfare, and that is where funding for the Human Services Commission lies. There's also 13%, which goes to the general government, and so county administration, for example. 3% goes to central services, 2% to non-departmental county level work. And so when we're looking at kind of the broad picture of where reductions can occur within the general fund, if there's decisions to not reduce public safety, for example, where reductions can occur lie within very few areas, as you can tell by this chart. So if we dig in further, that 8% that goes to public health and welfare goes to a few different divisions. And what is related to the Human Services Commission funding is about $3.1 million of the total 8% pot of funds, which is about $5.5 million. And so this human services funding, it includes the dollars that go out to our nonprofit partners, and that's the vast majority of it. It also includes a bit of staffing money to support coordinated entry, as well as coordinator support for training and technical assistance and meeting coordination. And then we also, within the Human Services Division, we have a bit of general fund that goes to our veteran services, which really focuses on helping veterans access the benefits that they're eligible for. So also really important work. And so as we move forward with our advocacy for the budget process, of course, our focus is on sustaining these resources to the greatest extent possible, so that we can very much get them out to our community partners for the important programs and services that are provided. So the challenge that our commissioners and the budget committee as a whole have is that we're looking at a general fund deficit for the next fiscal year. And right now we're seeing that there's about a $3 million deficit when we compare general fund being utilized this fiscal year compared to what general fund revenue we will receive for the next fiscal year. Another factor with this is that we understand there will be less funding available from the state for the sheriff's department in the amount of about $2 million. And so really when the budget committee is looking at the deficit for the next fiscal year, it's about $5 million. And so that is certainly significant and challenging, and does very much mean that there would have to be reductions in the current allocations of general funds. Folks often ask me, how did this happen? And I go back as a student who was in school when Measure 5 passed in 1990. I remember a teacher saying to me, the reason that I needed to bring in Kleenex from my home was because Measure 5 passed, and there is no longer resources within the school district to be able to buy extra things like Kleenexes or colored pencils. And so that sticks with me many, many years later.
I was on the school board.
Oh, I should have talked to you then. And so what happened is that Measure 5, it capped the property tax limits to 3% each year. And so jurisdictions can only increase property tax by 3% each year, as opposed to, like, say, in Washington state, where property taxes can increase like 11% in 1 year, if the local jurisdiction, votes to allow that. And so it means that the ability to raise revenue to support a general fund deficit, for example, and to support, lots of other needs, just isn't something that elected officials are able to do within Oregon. And it limits the ability to bring in more dollars. Yes?
May I add one thing on that? And from a Lane County perspective, because in 1990, we had historically received tremendous percentages of our general fund budget from timber revenue on BLM and federal lands. And those dollars went away, but at the time we had been receiving high amounts. We had a really low property tax rate. When Measure 5 set our property tax rate, we were set at a low rate that was artificially low because we had been dependent on timber dollars. So we have I believe it is the third lowest property tax rate of all the counties in Oregon, in Lane County. And of the property taxes that we pay, of course, only 11% of the property taxes that you pay go to Lane County. The rest of it goes to schools, it goes to the school fund, but to cities, fire departments, et cetera, and other small. So Lane County only gets 11% of that. So our general fund that we're talking about, the diminished dollars this year, we're already at a tremendous deficit where we had been historically. And we don't need to go into details about that. And most people know the story. It's become old news, kind of boring news that we used to get timber dollars and now we don't. But that's why we're where we are, is because we have a low tax rate based upon what it was set when we were receiving a great deal of money from the federal government for timber harvest on federal property, which is more than half of Lane County.
Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate your historical perspective. It's important. And we also, in the 2000s, experienced a reduction in timber replacement revenue from the federal government. And so that continued to strain our resources. And as Commissioner Farr was sharing, we do have an artificially low permanent property tax rate when we compare ourselves to other counties. And the reality is that many of these don't have such a rich timber land. Half of Lane County is timberland, and so it means that we're just receiving far less revenue than other counties do. And for example, in Deschutes County, where the tax rate is the same here, looking at the blue, they have enacted a public safety tax that they've enacted both within the county and then within the city limits. And that helps to support the overall amount of resources going to the county for public safety. And so unfortunately, Lane County in particular is just underfunded to be able to meet the wide array of supports that it's expected to provide across the county. And I recognize that this is not unique necessarily just to Lane County, but I think it's important to share. To continue to dig into that a bit more, I also want to share, this is an example of what taxpayers see when they're paying their taxes, in that I've had folks say, well, I mean, I feel like I'm paying the same amount of taxes as I was when, I moved from Deschutes County. And the reality is, actually, if we're talking about Deschutes, folks are paying even more potentially, but where their dollars go is split differently. And so if we're looking at Jackson County, their county tax rate is a little above $2, but their the average city unweighted by population rate is about $3. Whereas with Lane County, the county's receiving about $1.28, but then other jurisdictions are receiving an average of $5.19. And so that's a factor that most people don't dig into, like, well, where is my dollars going? And so that is also a challenge for Lane County in that it may not be an option. It's up to the elected officials, of course, to be able to raise additional dollars in that folks are already seeing considerable funds coming out of their pockets. So what does this mean for the Human Services Division and particularly the Human Services Commission funding? I want to share this with folks because I just want to alert that there could need to be reductions to the Human Services Commission funding that's available. And that does equate to potentially fewer dollars or even a potential of programs not being able to be funded. I certainly hope not. And I know that our commissioners and the budget committee care deeply about social services, but we're to a point with the county budget that really, really hard decisions need to be made because the vast majority of the dollars are going to very important, vital resources across our county. It also does mean that there's less staff time to support both internal and external programming. I imagine, especially if you're a program that works with Lane County, you've seen that there now are fewer program service coordinators, for example, on our team to support the great work that's happening in the community. We also would, look to rely more on state and federal funding. But it's a tough time to do that. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lack of clarity when we look to the next fiscal year. And so it's tenuous at best if we're looking to rely on those dollars. And so time will tell certainly how things shake out. And we hope to have more clarity, particularly on the Human Services Commission funding come May, and also hope to have more clarity regarding state funding as well, that is uncertain. I also want to take a look at the fiscal outlook for federal and state funding, and I think I'm very creative. And so when I'm talking about federal funding, right now, as I speak, the funding is pretty stable. And that is much to the credit of advocates across our nation and our local elected officials who advocated in Congress for the funding to be sustained, if not increased just a little bit. I added my little whirligigs there because no surprise to anyone, there's an enormous amount of uncertainty. And while we know the federal fiscal year funding today, beyond this year, lots of unknowns. And so I'm not in a position where I feel like I can feel secure in what dollars we're going to receive in federal fiscal year 28. And I'm sure that the feeling, is among many in this meeting. Regarding state funding, we have much more certainty than we did at this time last year. So that's positive. But based on that certainty, we are seeing some reductions, and I'll go into detail in a moment, as well as some dollars being sustained at the same level. And so, I couldn't decide which one's better. On some level, I think the state, because at least we know what dollars are available for the most part. So when we're looking at state funding, what I have here is, I'll start first with the federal fiscal year 25 funding, because it's noticeably positive when we compare to the current year or next year. Federal 26 is our current year, and then looking at fiscal year 27, where we have great uncertainty related to the statewide shelter system funding. The reason is that there is a formula that the state is developing with which they'll allocate the state funds through. And that formula hasn't been developed and shared yet. And so we have no idea at this point how much money we're going to receive. I would like to assume that it will be at least the amount of money that we received this year, which is 7.6 million. Could potentially be more, but time will tell. Things are staying stagnant with ORI funding, which we utilize as diversion to help people move out of houselessness quickly with one-time assistance. Long-term rent assistance, we're seeing the available dollars continue to decrease. Primarily, there was rollover funding that wasn't used in fiscal year 25. That's been used in this current year. And then 4.2 million is what is left from the allocation in fiscal year 26. And what that likely means is that there won't be additional new households served through long-term rent assistance. Instead, the focus will be on continuing to support households that are housed and receiving rent assistance now through next year. Because the focus of the program is that it be long-term and that folks receive a long-term subsidy of supports. Lastly, with eviction prevention, rent assistance, this remains pretty stagnant compared from this year to next year. Want to give a shout out to all who advocated for additional prevention funds during the state legislative session. There was an enormous effort, but unfortunately, the state really didn't allocate any additional funds, whether it was for our local coordinated effort with Benton County for additional shelter funds or the prevention asked that was for $10 million. Those were not supported through this legislature. On the federal level, the real focus would be just sustaining the dollars that we receive. And here's an example of a number of them, as well as advocating to sustain program policy approaches. As we've talked about, there's a real curve that the continuum of care policies are taking. And there's also been a lot of discussion around making changes to the community services block grant. And so advocating to, sustain as much of the current policies as possible, and with a focus on doing no harm to folks and to programs within our local communities. And then also, an advocacy opportunity around the continued Medicaid cuts and movement for states to have to cover more costs, in that it is very much taking away resources that are supporting, already state-funded programs. So it's creating really challenging situations for states across the nation. And then we also know that SNAP or food assistance, that continues to narrow the population that's being served. The work requirements have recently been initiated for folks, and we're seeing more and more people move off of the SNAP benefits. So that's an area for advocacy as well. Want to share that the PHB Advocacy Task Group is developing a one-pager, notably for the United Front visit to Washington, D.C., that a number of elected officials from different jurisdictions go on. And the focus there is to give them information like this to be able to advocate with our elected officials to simply do as little harm as possible and hopefully even more and better things. So again, next steps that we'll be watching are the County Budget Committee in May and June of this year, and the Lane County Human Services Commission funding. We'll also be watching to see the allocations from the cities of Springfield and Eugene. We're awaiting the shelter funding from Oregon Housing and Community Services. And then there'll continue to be advocacy efforts. And it's exciting to have the PHB Advocacy Committee in that I think we're interested in doing much more to inform this group about where advocacy opportunities lie. All right. Any questions?
Any questions for anyone? I wanted to ask, because you said something about training around the continuum of care and some of the other services through continuum of care. And I think sometimes I hear that people think that the funds that we get from the federal government for COC actually covers the costs of the county doing the COC, but it does not. It covers a portion, but we still have to take funding from general funds in order to make sure that the whole entire system works. So even though we might get an increase on the administrative part for the continuum of care, the federal funds we receive does not cover the actual cost of making sure that the whole entire system runs.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Any other?
I was going to say that, Chair, from your history, you have a keen understanding of that, don't you, with the work that you do as your daily job? You understand the ebbs and flows based upon outside resources that we've always counted on. But the point I want to make is that you've heard about Lane County's budget woes, which just covers the human services portion, and we have the public safety and all the other things. But we have the mayors of Springfield and Eugene here right now, and they can certainly attest to the fact that Lane County is not the only one, by any stretch of the imagination, that are facing these same kind of draconian cuts in our budgets. And but to both the mayors, if you wanted to add anything at this point in time, just to kind of underscore the fact that these are dire times in terms of funding the services that we historically have been one of the leaders, not just in Oregon, but in the nation in helping. So to the mayors, if you have anything to say, I'd love to hear it. Thank you, Chair.
Mayor Knutson and then Mayor Van Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. I had raised my hand because I wanted to be sure to thank Kate for this presentation and overview and just the way of walking through this amount of information. I think given the fact that at our county and our cities, and this is true across cities all across the state of Oregon, it's true in most or all of our counties, that the challenges that we face year in and year out with our responsibilities to balance a budget and then also facing increasing demands on community services and doing our very best to meet community needs with the limited resources that we have. As just alluded to, it is not unique to our county or to the cities that are the population center of our county. And I think the work of this board to seek collaborative solutions, efficiencies, ways that we can act strategically to stretch the resources that we do have. I think looking into these coming years, as we've talked about for many months, this will be even more important. But everything that was just alluded to in terms of my expectations as the mayor of Eugene is that we will continue to face a really challenging budget conversation in our next 2-year cycle. And that is a reflection of a lot of the same headwinds and forces that were indicated with Kate's diagram of the downward pointing arrow in terms of our state funding. But we'll continue, to be really dedicated to this work, and it will be a crisis that we find opportunity in, that's for sure.
And I can't echo that enough, right? That the presentation is really good, but it only touches the surface of what every government agency is going through right now. And I just would encourage people to just stay engaged with it and ask a lot of questions as we begin to navigate our way through it. The school districts and the parks districts and the LCC board are going through the same sort of struggle as well. And underlying that pinch point of in the 90s of like Lane County in particular was hit really, really hard by the combination of, Measure 5, 4750, and the reduction of timber dollars all at the same time. So the roots of this crisis aren't something that happened, in the last 2 years. It has been something that we have successfully kicked the can down the road on for a very, very long time. This is something that governments continue to have to work their way through and tell the better story about just how efficient, that we've gotten providing services. But this has been a long-term trend, and the inflation the last couple of years really has just taken its toll and accelerated this, combined with all the other things the economy is facing. And I think we all recognize how tough it is out there right now.
Sure, may I
Oh,
add
go
just
ahead.
kind of a summary of what the mayor has just said, and they speak with profound personal knowledge. The triple hit that Bear Van Gordon talks about was kind of offset because we had a pretty robust economy in the 1990s, and we didn't know it was as bad as it was because things were kind of clicking along economically on the West Coast and in Oregon in particular. We didn't notice until after 2000 was when things really started hitting. And the other thing that Mayor Knudsen just said that really is important, the work, and I paraphrased you, Karen, I wrote, the work of the PHB becomes even more critical in coordinating existing resources and garnering external resources to focus on our local cuts. So I think for the folks who observe and perform and participate in the Poverty and Homelessness Board, it's never been more important that this board stick together and coordinate our efforts than it is on your watch, Chair Murphy.
All right, as I slide down in my.
We're with you, Chair.
Thank you.
Not alone in this work. Executive Committee, very much with you. And thank you, Commissioner.
Do we have any other comments before we move on? Just want to say thank you, Kate.
You're very welcome.
Wonderful presentation.
Looks like Sherry has her hand up.
Oh, all right. Sherry, sorry.
I just have two quick questions, largely because I don't fully understand what we're talking about and I want to understand better. So the first one is, and I know that in this particular environment, this would go over not well at all, but how do you increase that property tax? Is that like initiative process and then a vote? And then the second one is, it looks to me like so much of the budget is taken by public safety. And so I'm trying to understand better why they get to have that much of the budget, I guess.
If people are good, I will dive in and see if I can't get my assessor merit badge right now. If you can text her and see. The details really matter around how you increase property taxes. It's two ways, right? You have to grow how much taxable property you have out there. That's where growth really does matter. But there's a constitutional cap on how much what your tax rate can be, and you'll hear it called a funny word called compression. So you cannot pay over $10 per thousand, and it's really much more complicated than this for your property. So there is a limit to what the tax rate can go above. So it limits how much we can actually go out and ask the voters for operating funds. So that is a natural constraint on the conversation. And I'll give you a brief lesson for Springfield. Out of the top 10 providers, 7 are top 10 property taxpayers in the city of Springfield. 7 of them are at compression, which means even if we successfully passed a bond at the county level or the city level, right, the amount that it would actually yield is beginning to go down. And then the second question you really asked is this question around public safety. And you have two things happening with government services, like in the city of Springfield. We spend more in public safety, public works, and fire than we collect in property taxes. And that's fairly common. And sometimes that is a driver of what the priorities the councils choose are. And sometimes that is a driver of, where the people are, as far as the FTEs usually drive the cost. And not to say the workers aren't valuable, but like when you're in city politics, you city government, what takes a lot of people historically are the cost centers. So I hope that helps.
It does, thank you. It's more complicated than I thought it was, so thank you.
And I think Mayor and then Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And I will just add to Mayor Van Gordon's summary that there have been at the state level this past year legislative work group that was focused on digging into Measure 5 and Measure 50 and understanding, beginning to understand what some paths forward might look like for our state. As was alluded to, it's a significant process to shift how this is currently operating. Most people, when they receive their annual tax bill, they are going to see a difference on that bill between a term that you would know as the market value of your home versus the assessed value of your home, or the market value of your property and business versus the assessed value. And that difference is the expression of some of these eccentric forces about 30 years ago on our property tax collection process. I'll add to that one thing that is not particularly well known or discussed is that I think sometimes people see that property tax bill and they think, well, thank goodness I got in when it was a good time, and now I'm seeing this distance between the actual value of my asset and what I'm taxed on for that asset. The contemporary eccentric aspect of that is that that also means that other new development is not taxed at its total value. And that is another way in which these decisions from about 30 years ago continues to impact not just properties that have been in existence for a long time, but also the revenue that we have as a community as a result of new development. So it is quite complex there, but there are legislative efforts underway to better understand this issue and see what we can do to create greater stability for our communities, county communities, and city communities.
Thank you, Chair. And that was wonderful clarity by both mayors. And Sherry, you asked why so much spent on public safety. 74%, I believe, on the pie chart that you saw of our general fund. That was Lane County. And even in spending 74% on public safety right now, in a county the size of Connecticut, we have 2 deputies patrolling this county from the top of the Three Sisters all the way to the Zeta Head Lighthouse, even though we are spending a large proportion of our general fund on public safety. Public safety doesn't get much money from other places other than the general fund. And back to where your dollars go, if you live in 4J and inside the city of Eugene, 11% of your property tax dollar goes to the county. 48% of that will go to the schools. Almost half of it goes to schools. And 32% of it, almost a third of it, goes to the cities. And then the other 9% is split up among other taxing districts, like some of it may go to local fire departments, etc. So, as the mayors are keenly aware of, and they've illustrated, it's complex where the money comes from and where the money goes from. And when Kate says we have the greatest expression of how to spend general fund dollars, we do, but hands are tied as to where it can be spent in terms of which wheel is squeaking the loudest. And gosh, it's I'm glad I'm not a mayor. Let me put it that way. I'm glad you are.
But we've got you too, Mayor, just like you got me. So there you go.
Thank you, Chair.
All here to support each other.
All the mayors in our call are now going to turn their cameras right back. Present and accounted for. Any other mayors in this group?
That's right. All right, and with that, we're going to turn it over to Carly and federal reporting update.
Thank you. Let me just get oriented on screen sharing. So just wanted to say today considered to be an update and not like a full report. So happy to answer questions as they come up for folks, and I expect to come back with more information at some point. But wanted to let you guys know where we're at with the federal reports that HMIS is required to submit each year. We have 4 of them. The longitudinal system analysis was due in January. They give us a couple weeks after the holidays to do that. The system performance measures were due on March 4th. And then we're working on the housing inventory and the point in time count right now. So lots of different things we could dig into, different data points. We did finish the first two, so wanted to let everybody know that that's true. I have a lot of data we could share from those. And I'm happy to sort of like field questions at some point about what types of information would you like to dig into at a later meeting. But just wanted to give you sort of like the overview of how those are looking. I've shared this slide, I think, every year that I've done this, so I'm going to just sort of like skip quickly, but just to say the system performance measures and the longitudinal system analysis are both for the federal fiscal year, so October through September. That means we're halfway through the next one. So I want to like let you know how the last one went while we're still have time in the current one, and that they have slightly different scopes. So I'm going to start with the system performance measures, which is focused on people rather than households. And then I've got a couple slides at the end for the LSA, which is households rather than people. It's a little bit confusing. Also, just like my preamble, I think I have to put before all of these, HUD is only interested in certain project types. Our system is very comprehensive. We do a really great job. There are a lot of projects that don't get included in these reports. So this is primarily projects where folks stay the night, like rapid rehousing projects, shelter projects. It does not include our alternative shelter projects, so like our Conestoga huts or car camping. And then only some of the information includes street outreach. So it's a lot, it's not everything. At the same time, I do think it's really important because we're in this like federal conversation about like, are we going to get money anymore? or what type of funding are we going to get in the future? What's the next COC application going to look like? And I think it's really helpful to see what questions the federal government has been asking. Like the types of questions that are in the report are there for a reason. They've got specific questions for us. So I think it's helpful to know, even if we might pull the measures a little bit differently, if we were to do it locally for our own purposes for planning, this is what they have. So I think it's helpful to know.
Hey, Carly, can you tell us who is Stella?
Yes, Stella, this is so funny. They have acronyms and they have things that don't stand for anything but are like women's names for some reason. We've got a couple of them. Stella is like a cool visualization software. So I've got a couple of pictures at the end and I can pull tons of those types of images for sharing, like whenever that's helpful. I actually kept them in the slide deck, so I have a ton at the end if there are specific questions, but it stands for nothing and I don't know why they did that.
The whole backstory, but I'm not going to share it.
Okay, wait, don't use them like that.
That's a great, thank you. That's a great question. And just wanted to put out there, like we've been talking about like these changes in this history over time. Primarily what I have in here is the federal fiscal year 25 at the bottom compared to the year right before that. I don't really have fiscal year 23, but I think it's helpful to remember not that long ago, we had programs that were COVID era, like you could only have this many people in your shelter. That really was not that long ago when we're doing this type of reporting. YHDP, where we were serving youth, started up in that 23 fiscal year. All in, those projects really started to pick up in those last couple of months of that year. So 24, which is the year we're sort of comparing to as a trend, all in really got going. Those shelter projects were like really up and going. We had the long-term rent assistance we've been talking about, prevention funds, a lot was going on there. We also saw the COVID funds kind of end. And we had sort of like a shift in how things looked because when we started all these all-in projects, the state had told us to set up a project in a specific way and they shouldn't have done that. So we had to make some changes and some things look a little bit weird in fiscal year 24. In 25, you still see like kind of a continuation of the all-in funds, as well as like things like YHDP, the BOB, different permanent supportive housing. We may have started out like smaller, but we also started to see the state funds dry up. So I think shelters were starting to get a sense that maybe the money wasn't coming through or like weren't taking referrals. we knew the prevention money was much smaller. And so projects, individuals who needed help and knew they were about to lose their housing, who would have accessed prevention in the previous year, may not have been able to do that. Our outreach funds also got smaller in this period of time. If I forgot anything, let me know. This is like my recollection. We saw things really started to wind down near the end, but a lot of fiscal year 25 was still like when we had money and could use it for purposes, like how are we doing? A lot happened during that time. Like we were able to do a lot of good work. So I think you'll see that here. The way I've organized these slides is I've got like highlights for you. And then on the next slide, I'm probably just gonna skip it, but I have the specific number across years for folks who are curious. But I've got, where did we do better from last year to this year? Where did we do about the same? And then where have we sort of decreased in performance? So the 24 versus 25, we saw more people come through these projects on the system performance measures. Our annual counts for people, the number of people we were able to serve in shelter and transitional housing were higher. The fact that we saw more sheltered homelessness in our case is actually a great thing because we know our unsheltered population is so high. We were able to get more people into those projects and we were able to turn over those beds more quickly. Like we served more people, that's great. Also, the folks who exited to permanent housing in previous years, did they come back to need additional supports? From street outreach and permanent housing, we saw, no, they did not. So we saw an improvement in how many folks were returning. Those are great. If we have fewer people coming back, then we can serve more people, right? There are a few measures where we did about the same. So for the folks that we were serving, what was their average length of time homeless or median length of time? It was approximately the same. The return rate from folks we had exited from shelter was about the same. One of the things that HUD is very interested in is increasing income for folks who are in projects that they fund. So for continuum of care funded permanent housing projects, people who left the program, their income was, the rate at which people had grown their income was about the same. Our exits from outreach were about the same. And then for folks in permanent housing, we kept or exited on to positive destinations about the same percentage. So we didn't do any worse and we served more people. So these are also positives. And then these are areas in which we didn't do quite so well. So folks who had been in transitional housing and exited to permanent housing, more of them came back than in the previous years. We also saw, I know on the last slide it said income growth was good, but in this one, for folks who had to stay in permanent housing who weren't exited, their income growth, fewer people grew their income for folks in those programs. Which Amanda and I were talking about, there's many reasons could be true. Perhaps that means the folks who still needed permanent housing weren't able to increase their income. Maybe there's a reason for both of those things. Or also maybe we weren't able to move them on because we haven't been able to increase their income yet. So a lot of things like get complex and there's a lot of things we could dig into in those categories.
And particularly for people who are disabled and on Social Security, because increasing your income is not when you're disabled.
Yes, exactly. Maybe we did a better job prioritizing who went there and they needed significant supports and we weren't able to do that, right? And that's why in a lot of the measures too, it's funny, they call them leavers and stayers. Leavers are the folks who we were able to exit. But for stayers, those folks who we couldn't exit, like there may be reasons for that. But it's one of the things that we're graded on. The final one was for folks who were exiting shelter or rapid rehousing. If they exited, was the place they were going a permanent destination? We didn't do quite so well. That one I did want to make sure to point out the percentage. We were at 23.7% the previous year. We were down quite a bit. It was about 18. Before I move on, just want to say like, that's the system performance measures, how we did on those. I think this conversation is going to come back naturally when we get to the COC application, when it comes out. Because we're often awarded a specific number of points for different things. In the past, it's been pretty much the same things as last year. And the number of points awarded have been very similar across years. This year, we don't know which ones they'll choose and how much weight they'll put on them. But in the past, we've lost quite a few points on system performance. Like, this is an area where we can do better. And particularly, like, there's some specific things where we can do as well. And also, given how long it takes to report and then put in an application, there may not be much we can do for the application that's going to come out in June, since it will be based on this year that we just reported. Hard to like change a whole system when they don't tell you what they're expecting and they're pulling it from a year that already occurred. But just like wanted to keep folks in the know that that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, ask a question about the income. Or do they ask for dollar amount or are they looking at source?
Both.
Okay.
So I simplified this a lot for this purpose.
Okay.
But we look at whether it's employment income, whether it's non-employment income, and then each year it's how much did you make when the year started, and then how much are you making now from each of those sources.
Okay.
So there's like a total income, there's an earned income, there's a non-earned income, and those are all specific measures. In general, though, these trends are about the same, where the stayers did not really see increases other than like COLAs for Social Security. And then the leavers did increase their income. Either questions or things I can bring back the next time we do this in a deeper way.
You know, I would just like to know like how many of those stayers are disabled. So like we can put a good sense around of an expectation of whether that number makes sense because they're disabled and on Social Security. And so therefore we wouldn't expect a lot of them to have an increase in their income. So then our numbers would make sense.
Yeah, we were having this conversation like 2 hours ago too. But it's slightly changed the way they're breaking up some of these and they're splitting out folks who are disabled and folks who are not. So this seems to be a place that they're headed to. So it's helpful, I think, for us to be looking at those things. I'm gonna move on to the photos then. And then if people have other thoughts, you know, happy to do that. Because this is the same date range, the LSA, we perform similarly. This is households, not people. We served a lot more households, which is great. And even though we were serving a lot more households, we maintained our exit to permanent destination rate, which is really cool. We did see higher returns. This is the highest in child-only households. A lot of those are youth who report to a shelter. They're exited to a destination that ends up not being so permanent. I think that's very common. Like we exit folks to family and then they end up needing shelter again. So those are like particular areas. But I brought 2 graphics and I've got tons of others for other questions that pop up. This is the Stella graphic that I get asked about a lot, this is sort of like a visual of all of our households who are included in the report and how they move through. So I won't go through all the pieces, but just to say, there are lots of different programs that folks may engage with. The length of time they end up staying homeless in that category will depend. And then we also look at, from that pathway, what percentage of them exited to a permanent destination, which would be like a positive because they no longer need the system resources. And then if we exited them onto housing, how many of them ended coming back, which is that red arrow at the bottom. So who we've got in our system currently, how many of them are we moving on, and who is coming back for more? Like those are the 3 areas you can sort of like hone in on more. There's a lot happening in these areas. And also just most folks are flowing through the shelter category. And that's because that's where we have the most beds available, is in the shelter category. There's a lot we could do to try to move more folks out of permanent housing, like move on to permanent housing or through some of those permanent housing programs, but also got to support folks as best as we can, and we don't want to exit people who aren't ready and then end up returning too. It's the tricky balance. And this is my last like slide for what I prepared and put in the packet, but this is the type of information, those same 3 categories I talked about. So we served a lot more households, which is great. Our days homeless is quite high. Our exits is something we can work on. Same thing for reducing returns.
Mayor Knudsen?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this presentation. It's really interesting diagram, Stella graphic, and then this summary, really helpful overview of how the system is performing. My question is probably one that several people are wondering, especially with the summary slide. It's catching my attention that we have an average of 95 days to return and a returning percentage at 17%, which feels like there must be some opportunity in there, but also that the return timing might indicate, a sort of 90-day period of time attached to a process. I'm not sure about that. And I'm just wondering if you could say more about how you interpret the data related to that 17%.
Yes.
And is that average really a closely nested number of days to return, or is it really wide ranging and 95 just happens to be near the middle?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really actually depends on the household type. So I didn't include this in the packet, but brought it in case there was this question, where you can see the adult only households. Most of those returns cluster around like 90 days plus. So they're able to stabilize for a while and then something happens. And for sure, the prevention piece is part of this too. Like if there are no resources to help you get back on track, that has definitely been a challenge. I've seen a lot of news articles about that recently, that evictions are very high right now. Whereas in other household types, it might be a little bit different. So for example, the child-only household, so everyone's under 18, those returns are happening at a different point in time. They're really clustered around the 91 to 180 days.
Mm-hmm.
It would be very cool to have some programming available to catch folks at this point in time and see if we can prevent a return with money. Like that would be a huge area in which we could make improvements.
I will offer completely unsolicited that I completely agree with what you just shared about the potential for a well-timed intervention. I think in so many of our lives that can be the difference between a really extraordinary opportunity or stability and a sliding door passing. And thinking about some of the organizational support that we have in our community, and that in these cases, these are examples of people who've moved out into housing stability. I'm wondering if there is any type of sort of targeted outreach, if we know something about, why it is that people are falling back into housing instability or losing the housing that they've attained. And if there are, a collection, I'm going to guess there are 4 or 5 catalytic challenges or experiences that a person might have that could lead to that instability. Are there ways that we could target some really simple outreach to ask if people need help with something before they lose their housing? Again, I guess what I'm wondering about.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen reports of other communities doing that and like using some predictive things to figure out who to proactively reach out to, like perhaps at that 90-day mark. There's a lot of
Thank you.
Other comments? Carly? All right, James, statewide shelter program.
Yeah, I think give me 1 second to pull up that slide here. I apologize. Some of these slides are very busy words, but wanted to give you all an update on the statewide shelter program. I know, many of you are in other meetings where this has been discussed, but I don't think we've specifically talked about this topic here at the PHB. But for those of you who know, the state has created a statewide shelter program using a model, a regional coordinator model. So each region of the state that's receiving state funds for shelter has a designated regional coordinator. There was an application and RFP process. Lane County was awarded the regional coordinator role for our community. So we're excited to continue to keep doing the shelter coordination work that we have been doing. There are some notable kind of shifts away from policies and practices and just how shelters are being looked at by the state. But primarily the program's, the intent is really to sustain the shelter beds that have been created in communities, since the governor's executive order on homelessness was issued. Notably, there's an opening up of approaches to sheltering, which I'll get into in more detail. But one of the first is that the statewide shelter program, while continuing to prioritize low barrier shelters, it is going to allow for a portion of shelters that are called recovery-based shelters, which I'll talk a little bit more about in detail. And I guess going backwards a little bit, I should note that we have already convened the Shelter Task Group, which had been an offshoot of the MAC group. We have had one meeting of that group. We have another one coming up next week, and that is the body that we're really using to help plan and submit. There's a statewide shelter program assessment and plan that has to be submitted to the state, and that is the entity that we have been working with, along with some other stakeholders. And Kate mentioned this in her presentation. We have yet to see the shelter funding allocation from the state, which makes planning obviously a little bit difficult. But again, the intent really is to sustain those beds that have been created.
That were funded by the state. That were funded
by the state, yes, thank you. So another notable thing to mention is that the state has updated, really broadened the definition of what can be included as shelter. So the state has historically utilized HUD's definition of shelter, which had language around electricity and plumbing requirements and heat, and the state is loosening that up to some degree. So the state now is saying that shelters can, they continue to be congregate or non-congregate facilities, but they need to meet at minimum these standards that are listed here. So the ability to have a close and locking door, that applies to freestanding structures such as Conestoga huts or pallet shelters. Meals need to be provided to participants, or food preparation facilities need to be on site with a food access plan. It's important to note this can also include shelters coordinating to provide food to participants off-site. It could be, an example would be transporting, shuttling folks from shelter every day to a day access center that the shelter is partnering with, that then would be providing food. They need to have restrooms on site and access to shower facilities. And then the structures, the places folks are staying need to have hard surface walls, floors, and roofing. So it's exciting to see a little bit of a loosening in the definition of shelter. I think we all recognize that communities need to get creative in how they're responding to unsheltered homelessness. And so this approach will, allow, as I mentioned, like Conestoga huts will now be able to meet that formal definition of shelter. Moving this thing back and forth.
James, clarification on that regarding the hard side. Conestoga huts now qualify as hard side.
Yes, and my understanding, and Mayor Knudsen may be able to interject, but I know Reagan may be on the call as well. The city did confirm with the state that those Conestoga huts would meet the requirements that are put in place by the state. This slide is one of the busy ones I was speaking of. being confirmed what I said was accurate. The state has created some distinct shelter types that will be included in the statewide shelter program. So there's what they're calling a basic overnight shelter, which in our community, primarily is going to be the severe weather shelters or other kind of night by night shelters where there's not, someone is not each day they're checking in, there's not case management being provided or additional support services. It's really just there's a place for them to stay that night, and then they come back the next night to see if they still have a bed. And then there's the housing focused shelters, which is what we have been operating and funding with state dollars here in our community. And those are the shelters where folks are receiving that housing focused case management. The state is getting a little bit more specific this go around with how they're defining housing focused shelters. So they need to be facilities where participants are able to access throughout the day and night, 7 days a week during all seasons and weather. And then to that housing focused piece, each participant needs to have a individualized housing service plan that's really focused on how can folks move out of shelter and into housing as quickly as possible through providing that housing case management and supportive services. And then the other category, which is another new type, is what has been referred to as STEPS, which is Safe Temporary Emergency Placement Sites. This primarily is referring to vehicular camping and basic freestanding structure programs. Our community, I'm not aware of our county having any more what have been referred to in other communities as kind of like safe camping sites. I think the closest example we've had recently is when Cottage Grove had a location where they were a sanctioned location where folks could go and put up tents and reside. There's other communities that have those as well. In our community, it's really the overnight camping programs that we have that would meet this category, that would be STEPS. I'm not going to read each of these, and I apologize for those of you online. I know it's very small print, but those STEP sites will need to meet specific requirements. Primarily, it's around safety, security, and hygiene. So ensuring they have plans for handling garbage, lighting, sanitation services that are available on site, access to drinkable water. Again, similar to the other shelters, they'll need to have a plan for folks to be able to access food. And then a severe weather response strategy. So recognizing that folks residing in a vehicle overnight or in a tent during severe weather are going to be especially vulnerable. And so there needs to be a plan to be able to connect folks at STEP sites to other shelters or other options during severe weather. How do I not hit that? So moving forward, the state, so initially the state had said regions needed to submit their the statewide shelter program assessment and plan. And when it says assessment, it's really looking at the full shelter system in a community, in a region, and also looking at the outcomes that those communities have met. And then really important focus this year too on the state is looking at data around equity and access. So looking to see, which populations, which race and ethnicities are potentially overrepresented in a region shelter system, and specifically also looking at folks that are being exited from shelter back to homelessness. And so a lot of this work will be looking at the data that we have in our community to help to identify gaps and potential areas for further development. And then the plan will take that data and along with other aspects, submit that to the state. Originally, the state had said that those plans were due April 30th. All of the regions said to them, it's very difficult to make a plan when we don't know how much money we're getting. So they're now saying those plans will be due 60 days after the allocation is received. March 19th right now, so we're getting close to like 3 weeks past, I think, what their deadline was, but we have not been, we had a meeting with the state. All of the regions met with the state earlier this week, and they were unable to provide a timeline at this point, just that it's coming. And it remains unclear what formula they will be using to determine allocation. So as we all know, the shelter funding allocation this most recent year was detrimental to us, to say the least. And so we'll be very interested to learn what the formula that they'll use this year. But in the meantime, like I said, we continue to have the shelter task group meet. We're meeting every other week just to ensure that we can get this plan created and be really thoughtful in its creation. And so there are pieces of it we can move forward without knowing the allocation specifically around kind of looking at that data and those data pieces. And then additionally, we're doing a lot of stakeholder and community engagement, looking at partners and stakeholders that, are maybe shelter adjacent. They have populations they serve that are more likely to access shelter. We're doing a lot of engagement with tribes locally, which is a part of the state's plan as well, and other culturally specific providers, just to make sure we're really looking at the whole system as a whole, and how we can improve that system and access to that system specifically. So we'll continue that work. We'll update the PHB as we know more. The next big thing is really the allocation, learning the allocation. And I will just put in a plug, if anyone on this call, whether you're a member or not, would be interested in participating in the shelter task group, please let me know. But I'd be happy to send you an invite that's open to anyone who's interested in just talking more about that one. Any questions about any of that I can try to answer for folks?
Hey, James, can you pull them up so I can see?
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Well, like I said, I'll keep you posted as things develop.
Thank you, James. And I know we just lost Mayor Van Gordon, but we're at jurisdictional updates. So Commissioner, we'll start with you if you have any, and then we'll go to online.
I think much of the stuff that I would talk about that's not solid or wastewater has already been covered in this meeting so far, so I'll pass along.
Okay. Mayor Knudsen of Reagan, you still with us?
Yes. Yeah, I'm happy to share a few updates from the City of Eugene. One is that the Home Governing Board awarded over $1.2 million in home funding to Cascade Housing Association for a proposal called the Harlow that includes 27 affordable homes and 3 three-story buildings. The Eugene City Council also awarded a city-owned property on Coburg Road for that project. Another funding source that we have, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the 2026 awards are in process. The city received 7 proposals in response to this year's Affordable Housing Trust Fund RFP. The proposals totaled over $3.3 million, which is unfortunately a lot more than the city has available this year, which is $650,000. Council will select projects this summer, and information about the proposals and the process can be found on the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund website. The other thing I had was just some rental market information that we thought might be useful to share to this group. This is from a study that Eco Northwest conducted for the city's renter protections work. That study found that, as we all know, our community continues to face significant rental housing challenges. Eviction filing rates are among the highest in recent years, mirroring state and national trends as pandemic era relief ends. Or has ended. Affordability remains a major concern. Eugene rents are more expensive than the peer cities that were used in the analysis, while median incomes remain among the lowest of its peers, resulting in high rates of housing cost mismatch and rent burdens. And housing supply does not meet the needs of Eugene renters, and new construction is slow to fill the shortage. Macroeconomic factors like wages, inflation, construction costs, and land use play a major role in shaping housing development and affordability of both homeownership and rental housing. I think that study also, I know it's in the packet that went to council last week for a renter protections work session. I think it's probably on our renter protections website if anyone's interested in it as well.
And do we have any representatives from our rural partners today? I didn't get to see all that. No.
I can hop on for
there.
Springfield.
Oh, Aaron. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I just noticed the mayor left. So, I guess similar to Reagan, I could provide an update. The city has 3 housing projects that we're moving forward. I guess I would like to highlight 2 of these sites were actually a land transfer from the county through the tax foreclosure process. And so we were able to acquire those properties with the understanding that we would put them forward for affordable housing. And so 2 of those have been awarded. One site on Loris Street, we used federal home ARPA dollars and awarded that property and those funds to Dev Northwest. And they're developing 3 units, 3 bedrooms for families on that site, rental units. And then the other site we acquired from the county is on South 52nd Street. And we were able to award that site plus some federal money to Dev Northwest as well, but this one for home ownership. So they're going to do a community land trust model. And so have 6 units available for home ownership. And then the third site, another county Springfield collaboration. We have an IGA with the county to receive ARPA funds to put forward for land acquisition, again, to help us buy land in Springfield for low-income housing. And so we purchased the property at 16th and Main Street, and we're able to award that with home funds to Cornerstone Community Housing, and they'll be building 40 rental units on that site. So, yeah, that'll be coming.
Wonderful to hear. And thank you, Aaron. Sorry about that. And then Maggie, you wanted to give us an update about Florence?
Yes, we are now taking applications for our new affordable housing project in Florence that's on 9th Street right next to the police station. And it's 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. I believe there's 34 units. And that will be opening, they'll be moving in the first families this summer. And it will also have childcare facility adjacent.
Wow, that's wonderful to hear. Thanks for sharing that, Maggie.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other communities? Are we to wrap up? Okay.
And I realized too, I don't know if this got updated correctly with next month's meeting, but just did want to note, we will be discussing the HMIS fee policy at next month's committee, and we'll be seeking a vote there. So Carly will be back to present on that. And then also wanted to note that Matthias Smith has stepped down from being a co-chair. He is going to remain a member of the PHB. He has a new employment opportunity that is just limiting his time to some degree. So we will be seeking a co-chair to fill Matthias's role as well. So if that's something folks are interested in, feel free to reach out to me.
It's like Reagan, co-vice chair.
Oh, excuse me, excuse me. How dare I? Co-vice chair. Oh, please.
No co-chairs.
Well, I hope we have people reach out to James, because it'll be wonderful. We can come back next week with the full committee and have our slate ready to be approved. So don't be shy, PHB members, especially those with lived experience. So, all right. Since you did the wrap up and we are like 1 minute till we are done, let us adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone. See you next month.